Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fourth podcast of this year, and today's topic is on the model minority. So first, I'll quickly explain what OCA is. So this podcast is sponsored by YOCA. The OCA is a non-profit organization with a mission to advance the social, political, and economic well-being of AAPI in the United States. And as YOCA members, we speak on key issues and topics youth face on a daily basis. So like I said before, today's episode is focusing on the model minority myth and its effects on Asian American communities. So let's introduce everyone. So hello, I'm David.
I'm Ken.
I'm Sophie. And Emily.
I'm Anderson.
Alright, so let's first talk about the definition of the model minority myth.
Okay, so the model minority myth portrays Asian Americans as a highly successful, law-abiding, and academically proficient race that has achieved the American dream.
Part of the myth is that Asian Americans have achieved the American dream through just hard work, education, and perseverance, when in reality, sometimes it's been more than that, and sometimes maybe there's been different American dreams, but Asian Americans have been classified as only having this dream of becoming a lawyer, someone who is in a high position and can earn tons of money.
Yeah, basically it's the fact that because Asian Americans are statistically more successful in the United States, as a result, they do not face any discrimination or oppression in society. And it's also just grouping Asian Americans into one homogenous group while paying little attention to the diversity aspect that arises in different AAPI communities. Alright, so I guess does anyone want to give a quick introduction about the history of immigration?
Yeah, so it goes back mainly to the gold rush in California because
I think it was the Transcontinental Railroad.
Yeah, so the gold rush was before the Transcontinental Railroad.
Was? Okay.
And then, I believe. No? I might be wrong on that. I'm pretty sure the gold rush was before. That's what brought people to the West, and also people from Asian countries to the West Coast to California. And after that, once they stopped finding as much gold, they started to build the Transcontinental Railroad. And then with that, a lot of white workers wanted to, control immigration from Asian countries because they thought Asian workers, especially Chinese workers on the railroad, were stealing their jobs because Chinese workers were willing to take harder jobs, more dangerous jobs for lower pay, and they were often paid less because of the language barrier. They weren't able to advocate for themselves. And then I guess the next big thing would be the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I believe was passed in 1882 or 1884. But this really restricted immigration from
1882.
1882. See, from the summer reading program, you guys should attend next year. So the Chinese Exclusion Act, which controlled and limited immigration from China. And I guess the next part, which leads into the model minority myth, was the first people, or the few people that were allowed into the U.S. from China were mostly professional workers. They were college educated, coming here either to further their education or work as professionals. So I guess this influx has led to the start of the model minority.
Sure. I can also you want to speak?
No, you can go.
Okay. Also add a bit after World War II, the interconnectedness between the world got more cohesive, I guess. And however, there's Asian countries like the Philippines or China that had severe lack of human rights and a lack of opportunity in certain areas. At least for China, there was the cultural revolution that started killing smart people, or killing educated people.
Yeah.
And then in the Philippines, it was a dictatorship under the Marcos administration. And as a result, these all served as push factors to push skilled laborers and skilled professionals to the United States in search of better opportunities. And this was in combination with the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 that basically removed the quotas on racial groups, basically repealing the Chinese Exclusion Act and allowing a more influx of immigration to the United States to also contrast to the Soviet Union at the time that had strict border controls. And this also then led to the Immigration Act of 1990, and this was the first employment-based immigration service or act that seek to provide skilled laborers for innovation in American industry. So they basically provided professional visas for the highly educated, and like Ken said before, this further skewed the population where there would be more skilled laborers coming from Asian countries, making them, on average, more successful.
Exactly. So, like Ken and Dave had said before, all of these, the influx of like skilled workers coming from Asian countries into America, could have led the common American to believe that all the Asian population was just skilled because of what they were seeing at the time.
All right. So now we're for the portrayal in media. So basically, I think we mentioned this in the first podcast. I'll bring it up again. There was Hop Sing and Bonanza, and these were all just media depictions of Asian Americans that further contributed to the model minority myth and to the viewpoint that Asian Americans are a monolithic group of people. So Hop Sing was a Chinese cook that was easy to please employers and really spoke up for himself. And he was seen as docile, which just the overall stereotype as Asian Americans being docile and like lenient and like not trying to please other people, and these stereotypes were also used to be pitted against other minorities such as African Americans at the time, which were stereotypically seen as like aggressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's why the myth is called like the model minority myth, right? So this is something like a lot of I guess like lawmakers will point to the Asian American community. You like look at them, they're minorities, but they're like in general highly successful. Why can't these other minority groups do the same? It must because they don't want to, right? And so this is very damaging because not only it others Asian Americans, because we are still a minority group within the United States. And it also makes it seem like Asian Americans don't face any hardships or discrimination within the U.S., which is definitely not true. I think that Westerners, I don't know if that's the right term, but like Americans and Europeans often saw themselves as better than the rest of the world. That's why like slavery existed for so long. And when they expanded into Asia, they looked down upon the local people as they did when they took over parts of Africa. So this idea that it is like exotic, they don't really understand the like Asian cultures. They see them as, like we said, like meek and docile because like respect and respect is like a big thing in Asian culture. So I guess they saw that respect as weakness, perhaps. And so, yeah, as Anderson said, this might have justified like European imperialism to a certain degree.
Yeah, and like these stereotypes like continue to exist in American society about like the exoticness or the mysticalness of Asian Americans, and it further separated them as like the out group, and like how they're like still and like continue to be exotic even though they they immigrated to the United States. And it just shows how like they're not fully assimilated into society, and that's a common belief of thought among Americans.
Yeah, so even though technically the term is Asian Americans, they're still thought of as that like exotic group that's not truly assimilated to American society.
We're seen as Asian first and not American, right?
Yeah. American Asian.
Yeah.
All right. So now we'll discuss like the key moments that showed how Asian Americans like face discrimination, because the model minority myth, like I said before, talks about how because we're so successful, we don't face discrimination. This led to like multiple hate crime instances in the past few years.
One example is Vincent Chen, who is from Detroit. He was attacked with a baseball bat
So just a quick interjection. This was not a recent case. This is actually quite an old.
Yeah, it's like 30. It's like 30 years ago.
Right.
This was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
When a Detroit man named Vincent Chen, he was attacked with a baseball bat. And the witnesses testified about racial slurs and derogatory remarks. But the prosecution for Vincent's attacker failed to establish racial intent. The entire jury was white, and
yeah, so
he basically got away with it. There was no punishment. The conclusion was manslaughter.
Just a little context. This was when the Japanese automotive industry was expanding quite a lot, and so the American automotive industry was struggling to a certain extent, and people were losing jobs. And so a lot of people working in the automotive industry blamed Japanese people, and since they believe we're all one group, these attackers sought out Vincent Chen because he was Asian and beat him to death.
Also, Vincent Chen was Chinese and not Japanese. Yeah. Yeah, and then basically to summarize impact, just the fact that like this was the first case of a major hate crime that got national attention among the Asian American community because of the fact that the perpetrators of the crime, which were I think 2 white men at the time, did not face any punishment. I think at first they were fined and like gave some jail time, but then after a retrial, they were basically found to the all white jury could not find racial intent and thus charged them with manslaughter, which means like unintentional killing of someone. So they got absolutely no punishment, no jail time, no fine.
Actual consequence for the actions that they had done.
And I believe recently it came out that the men who attacked Vincent Chen purposely sought him out. It wasn't, so that I believe is first degree murder. It's murder, like pre-planned. They intentionally sought out an Asian man to take their grievances out, and so that just shows the hatred that exists for Asian Americans in this country. So.
The next case is similar to Vincent Chan and Chin Lu. Also died due to being struck in the head. This time he pierced his skull on a beer bottle, and he died. However, in this case, the perpetrators got a 3-year sentence, which is still really low if you think about the whole scheme of things, how they literally killed a person.
But and nowadays murder is taken a lot more seriously. Like people come on life, people usually get life in prison for murder.
Yeah.
Things have only gotten worse, really, with the COVID-19 pandemic happening. In fact, the amount of Asian AAPI hate crimes rose 150%.
So there were
2,804 in 10
a
months.
lot more.
One of these examples was when a 91-year-old man was shot to the ground in Oakland.
Mm-hmm. Or the instances in New York City where
the Atlanta spa shooting
were pushed onto the railroad tracks, the spa shooting.
Right, and this 2,800 numbers just in the first 10 months since the pandemic started. I think in total the number reaches 7,000 over the span of 2 to 3 years, which is
a lot. And just think about that. That's basically at least 1 or 2. At least 10, I think.
Yeah, that's that averages out to around 10 a day.
Which is these aren't just normal oh, you're Asian. Well, it's actual violence among towards Asian Americans.
And often targeted at the elderly who are unable to defend themselves.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone here would like to give a personal story about model minority. I know we're all still students here, so if anybody would like to speak to that.
I mean, one common type of the model minority myth is that all Asian students have to be good at like the STEM field, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like everyone Asian wears glasses and stuff like, or they're bad at sports. But the fact is, this is all a myth since you definitely can't see as a listener. But all of us in this room don't have glasses on.
To be fair, I wore glasses as a kid.
Yeah, so
yeah. But I wear contacts now.
Yeah.
And
I always wear contacts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are still the myth, but even though some aspects might be slightly true, but
I think it's a stereotype. You can't generalize an entire group of races and just say, oh, you're all good at math, you're all good at science, right? I think culturally we're kind of often steered in that direction, because a lot of parents will see like science or like professional fields as a better career than more liberal arts careers. And so I think a lot of the younger generation of Asian Americans will often go into STEM, not because we're inherently good at it, but because we're steered in that direction by the older generation. I don't know if you can speak to that, but I'm personally studying computer science. I fit the Asian guy stereotype was like, oh, maybe just like CS or finance, right? But yeah.
Yeah, I plan to study pre-med, so I also all stereotype.
It's like business, engineering, or pre-med, which I think is somewhat true.
Yeah.
But not because we're inherently more like suited for these fields.
Yeah.
It's rather sort of like a cultural thing, because many of our parents have immigrated from like Asian countries where maybe when they grew up the economy wasn't that well, or maybe they grew up in harsher conditions, and so now they're in the US, they want their children to have the ability to like live a better life, and so many of these STEM related professions are often like more stable and offer.
It's like the fact that like they took that risk, and then because they did, they try to provide a safer and like easier ability for us to like pursue whatever to pursue something safe in the United States by providing this opportunity.
I think they want to continue that like upward trend of like upward mobility, and it's, I would say, harder to do that with like a liberal arts degree or like pursuing the arts, which we spoke to somewhat in one of our last podcasts.
Exactly. Like a lot of these cultural stereotypes or cultural ideas can also tie into mental health. So remember to check out our second podcast on mental health.
Yeah, and it shows how like by stereotyping individuals to something that they are not, sometimes like if there is an Asian American, there definitely is an Asian American out there who like, I don't know, it's like struggling in school and like being constantly told that like you're expected to be on a higher level because you're Asian American, like that can take a toll on one's mental health and it's like sense of belonging to one's identity.
The idea like that, oh, all Asians are good at math, there's bound to be Asian American people who aren't, and then they have that pressure on them just because they're Asian, that, oh, I have to be good at math, I have to be good in the sciences.
Yeah, and a lot of times that pressure can like snowball until it develops into something that's a bit more serious and really needs to be dealt with.
And so I think that segues well into some of the consequences of this myth, how it can harm the Asian community in general.
Yeah, so first it would be the glass ceiling. Sorry, cut that out. First it would be the glass ceiling, just talking about how there's a lack of like leadership positions in like Asian American communities for like big corporations. So the glass ceiling meaning that like there is a limit to how high you can go up the bureaucracy simply because you are Asian American. And this ties back to the stereotypes, to the model minority myth, because we're seen as like the passive and the submissive type, where we don't like go out of our way to try to reach for these opportunities. Instead, we just follow what other people tell us, similar to like the cook we talked about before, Opsing.
Right. Asian Americans are often seen as like the quiet, hardworking type, where they'll be a great worker, but they don't have the like what it takes to lead other people, because we're often taught to like keep our head down, don't make waves, just like do your work. And so that sort of mindset that I think a lot of older Asian generations have isn't the most beneficial to leading others and moving up the leadership ladder.
Exactly. And if we want some hard statistics backed up, well, only 2.4% of all the Fortune 500 CEOs are actually AAPIs. And this was part of like a study done from Stanford.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I guess also another consequence of the myth is like overlooking the struggles of like AAPI living in poverty. So according to a statistic, 2.4 million AAPI are living in poverty in the United States. And going back to the occupational issues, 1 in 3 AAPI do not have paid sick leave compared to 8% of white workers. And this also shows how like they are not given these like safety nets or these like access to other like beneficial welfare programs or opportunities where like other comparative workers do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a case of survivor bias, where we look at the like successful, we look at those who like thrived, and we look to these success cases and be like, oh, these people represent this entire group, whereas
in reality, they're probably only like the small portion.
Yeah.
Right.
So myth causes us to like overlook these like people living in poverty, and like,
or even just people living like
middle class
lives, right? They still face hardship. They still struggle. It's not everyone's like a doctor making $1 million a year, right?
I think this also speaks to like the barriers for workers in the United States that often get overlooked, which is like the language barriers of moving to a whole new country and learning a different language to like survive, and as well as the lack of like U.S. job experience because these people are like first generation immigrants that do not have that foothold in like American society. They don't have the safety net, don't have the financial backing, so they really need to work hard, and like if they don't, they get set back.
Exactly, and sometimes your credentials in maybe Asian countries don't really carry over to the American countries. Let's say, like if you had an MD in Asia or China, then you wouldn't necessarily have that same MD degree in America.
Yeah. Like I'm currently working at a pharma company, and a lot of the workers there are like we're like MD and like surgeons, like medical doctors in China. It's simply because of the fact that like because they moved to the United States, they're unable to continue like practicing like medicine unless they retake medical school again and like go through the whole process.
Language that's
yeah, and like they would be competing against like 20-year-olds that like are more ambitious and a bit more and like less better memory, and like just like needing to basically start over again to live the same, like to like do whatever to do the things you wanted to do. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And then another consequence is that oftentimes we have a lack of political representation because, again, AAPI are seen as like meek and docile. And so you wouldn't necessarily go out and tell people to vote for you, and so that you get this like political representation.
I think to play devil's advocate here, this also is an issue in just like in the Asian American community where it's not necessarily our fault or like the Asian American community's fault, but the fact that like they were not given the ability to vote in their countries of origin. Like in China, you're not given the ability to vote. You can probably cast your ballot, but that doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. You can't contact your like local legislator and like seek for change. And that like culture of just being happy of where you are, and like not stirring the pot definitely carries over, and like that is why there is a significant lack of political representation, even for like citizens that even for Asian American communities that became, or people that became citizens, they still often don't vote because like they don't see the point of it because it's been it's not been ingrained in their culture.
And also, there's not a lot of young Asian Americans again going into politics
because that's not exactly as stable as becoming a doctor.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we can speak a little bit about how things are changing.
Okay.
Anderson, if you'd like to speak to that.
There have been a few efforts to counter this the model minority myth. One of these examples is the Federal Language Acts Act, which was when was this passed?
Recently.
Check that.
All right.
No, this act has not been passed yet. It's currently
It's a bill.
It's a bill. It's currently in the process of being passed into a law, but what it does is going to offer language assistance in healthcare, education, and government interactions, and it also fosters more AAPI representation in governments, local or federal.
This bill was introduced in the House of Representatives in February 2021 during like the COVID-19 pandemic. If you guys want to search it up more, it's also known as HR 1009. So.
Mm-hmm. And this bill would also just allow for more Asian American representation in government by getting rid of the language barrier that exists in like major institutions. And this also includes like healthcare and education.
And another effort that's I'm not sure it's passed yet is the Hate Crime Statistics Act. It has?
It has been passed.
So this has been passed. It was the Hate Crime Statistics Act, which helps to better collect. Yeah, it was passed in May 20th of 2021. And it helps streamline the process for collecting evidence and reports of racial intent behind crimes, and
especially COVID-19 hate crimes.
Right, with the uptick in COVID-19
So
hate crimes.
There were two versions. The first version of this was passed in the 1990s, to combat a rise of Asian American violence, as seen in the previous examples of Jim Liu or Vincent Chen. However, recently, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Biden administration also passed this bill called it's basically just the Hate Crime Statistics Act. I think they also title it. It's also referred as the COVID-19
Hate Crimes Act.
Yeah, Hate Crimes Act, to better streamline the process, because an important part of the judging process for seeing whether a prosecutor is seeing whether a defendant is guilty or not is reporting racial intent. So whether there was racial intent behind the action. So whether they said something racist while perpetrating it, or whether the reason why they did the thing was racially motivated.
So some ways listeners can also support advocacy initiatives and be allies in dismantling stereotypes are you can maybe spread this podcast around, send it to your friends, send it to your family.
Raise awareness about this issue and dismantling this idea of the model minority.
Yeah, and maybe when you see some AAPI discrimination going on, maybe just post on social media and advocate for a better change.
David, if you want to speak to this Asian American Advocacy Fund.
Sure. This Asian American Advocacy Fund basically provides resources through the legal action by holding perpetrators accountable for these actions. This also is due to the fact that often these hate crimes go unreported for many reasons, either that being unfamiliarity with the legal system. That's the most common reason why these hate crimes do not go through the legal channels. Because like I said, in Asian American culture, there is this thing to not stir the pot too much and just deal with it. And there's also language barriers as well as financial issues. It's expensive to hire a lawyer to defend you. So as a result, there's these organizations such as the Advocacy Fund for Asian Americans that provides legal actions through pro bono lawyers, which is basically just free lawyers for these hate crimes. For example, this organization helps the 91-year-old in Oakland perpetrator to be sentenced to 3 years for assault after pushing the elderly man to the floor. And this organization also seeks to protect legislative change towards more comprehensive data collection, as well as increased funding for Asian American communities and provide police accountability.
Yeah, and also another way to also help stop this model minority myth is maybe join into your local OCA chapter and help in stopping these AAPI myths.
Right. And so I think just to go over a little bit of what we said, model minority myth is the idea that all Asian Americans are highly successful and academically inclined. They're successful because of their hard work and perseverance and education. That they're the, like the word, like the name suggests, the model minority, like the model for all other minorities to follow. And this idea, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, and this idea has been a result of multiple immigration acts that only let in more highly skilled professions, such as the Immigration Act of the 1990s, as well as there was the portrayal of media of seeing Asian Americans as docile, as eager to please other people, and leading to Orientalism, which is seeing Eastern culture as exotic and not fully assimilated into society, and just the idea that Asian Americans do not face discrimination have been disproved by various hate crimes, such as Vincent Chen, who was killed by a baseball bat, and the people who did this crime face no jail time, which is a major bad thing. As well as just the consequences of the myth being like the glass ceiling, how there's a lack of leadership positions, and how this myth overlooks poor AAPI or people who are not successful, maybe the middle class individuals or people living in poverty, and having a form of survivor bias, which is only looking at successful examples and ignoring other examples, as well as there has been a lack of political representation because of the myth. And
if you guys want to further help, there's also another website called StopAPIHate.org. Yep. You can always go on there and just join in the local movements and hopefully continue to encourage further conversations about AAPI hate and advocacy.
Yeah, because I think the best way to dispel a myth is by talking about it. Just simply by talking about it, you can see everything that's wrong with it. We are everyone in this room is clearly different people. We're not the same monolithic group of people. And just simply by sharing our personalities, sharing our thoughts on certain things, it could change the myth for the better.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for listening.
See you next time. We'll be discussing advocacy.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.